corporate offices of Vane Holdings occupied the top 4 floors of a gleaming glass monolith in downtown Chicago, a place where the carpets swallowed the sound of footsteps and the air smelled faintly of expensive espresso and cold ambition. David Miller didn't belong in a place like this, and he knew it. His suit was a charcoal off-the-rack number from Target, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and his watch was a battered Casio that had survived 3 battery changes and a toddler's teething phase. But David wasn't here to look pretty. As the senior logistics auditor for Apex Supply Solutions, his job was to ensure that the massive, multi-million-dollar supply chain feeding Vane Holdings ran without a single hitch. He was also a single father. Ever since a drunk driver had taken his wife, Sarah, 3 years ago, David's world had shrunk to 2 things: keeping his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, safe and happy, and doing his job with absolute, flawless precision. It was 7:45 a.m. David sat at a sleek glass desk in a temporary office, reviewing the final quarterly line items before the massive contract renewal meeting scheduled for later that afternoon. The contract was a beast, a $9 million annual logistics and distribution agreement between Apex and Vane Holdings. It was Apex's largest account, and David had spent the last 3 weeks living on black coffee and 4 hours of sleep to ensure every decimal point was in its proper place. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Gable, Lily's after-school caretaker. "Hi, David. Just a reminder that Lily's field trip fee is due today. It's $9 for the Science Museum bus. They need cash by 8:30 a.m., David gasped. He had completely forgotten. Between the late-night spreadsheets and the rushed morning routine, the field trip form had slipped his mind. He opened his leather portfolio. Empty. He checked his wallet. A crumpled $20 bill, but he had promised himself he'd use that for gas on the way home, as his tank was sitting dangerously on E, and his bank account was frozen in a pending deposit limbo until midnight. He looked at the clock. 8:02 a.m. There was a small cafeteria on the executive floor, reserved for Vane Holdings elite. David grabbed his badge, hurried down the hallway, and walked into the pristine marble-countered cafe. The barista, a young guy named Leo, who usually smiled, looked tense. Standing at the counter, tapping a manicured fingernail against the marble, was Victoria Vane. At 34, Victoria Vane was the youngest female billionaire in the state. She had inherited a massive shipping empire and transformed it into a cutthroat conglomerate. She was famous for 2 things: her impeccable style and her absolute, merciless intolerance for what she deemed weakness or sloppiness. She wore a tailored cream-colored pantsuit, her sharp blonde bob cut to a lethal angle. David stepped up to the secondary register, trying to be invisible. He grabbed a small, prepackaged ham and cheese croissant from the cooler, something he could wolf down to justify using the register, and reached into his pocket for the 20. "I'm sorry, sir," the cashier whispered, looking nervously at Victoria. "The cash drawer is locked for morning auditing. Card or corporate account only until 8:30, David froze. If he used his personal debit card, it would bounce and trigger a $35 overdraft fee he couldn't afford. He didn't have a Vane corporate account. Then he remembered the petty cash envelope in his folder. As the visiting auditor, he had been issued a small envelope with $50 for incidental office expenses, ruler, highlighters, parking validation. He had used it for a box of paper clips earlier. There was a $10 bill sitting right there. "Just a moment," David said, pulling out the envelope. He extracted the $10 bill and handed it to the cashier. "Just charge it to the project incidentals. It's for a working breakfast. The total for the croissant was $8.50. With tax, exactly $9.20. The cashier hesitated, scanning the barcode. "Is there a problem here?" The voice was like cracked ice. Victoria Vane had turned around, her piercing blue eyes locking onto David's faded suit and the petty cash envelope in his hand. "No, Ms. Vane," the cashier stammered. "The gentleman is using a visitor incidental voucher for a food item." Victoria stepped closer, a cloud of expensive jasmine perfume following her. She looked at the receipt, then at David. "That envelope is designated for operational materials under the Vane Apex temporary budget. Am I correct?" David swallowed, keeping his voice polite. Yes, Ms. Vane. I'm David Miller, the senior auditor from Apex. I'm working through breakfast to finalize the $9 million contract renewal documents for this afternoon. I just needed a quick bite, and the cash registers are... I don't care about your excuses, Mr. Miller," Victoria interrupted, her voice cutting through the quiet cafe. "What I care about is policy. The incidental fund is strictly earmarked for physical assets and corporate logistics. It is not a personal piggy bank for your breakfast." David felt a flush of heat creeping up his neck. "Ms. Vane, it's $9. I am currently managing a multi-million-dollar transition for your company. I will gladly replace the $9 from my personal funds the moment the bank processing clears this afternoon." "It's the principle," Victoria said, her eyes narrowing. She loved moments like this. To her, dominance was maintained by enforcing the smallest rules. It kept the peasants in line. If you're willing to misappropriate $9 of my company's money for your own comfort, how can I trust you with a $9 million logistics pipeline? scurrying around, stealing scraps from the table. It's pathetic. The cafeteria went dead silent. The cashier looked down. Leo the barista stopped wiping the espresso machine. I am not stealing, David said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its deferential tone. I'm working 12-hour days to ensure your company doesn't lose hundreds of thousands in shipping friction next quarter. I used a temporary voucher for a $9 breakfast, which I offered to replace. You're talking back to me, Victoria said, a cruel, mocking smile touching her lips. In my building, while wearing a suit that looks like it was fished out of a dumpster. She turned to her assistant, who had just stepped into the cafe. Chloe, who is this man's direct superior? That would be Marcus Vance at Apex, Ms. Vane, Chloe replied instantly. Call Marcus. Tell him that David Miller is barred from this building immediately. Tell him that if David Miller is still an employee of Apex Supply Solutions by 9:00 a.m., I will personally review our entire relationship with his firm before the afternoon signing. David stared at her, stunned. You're firing me? Over a $9 misunderstanding? I have a daughter. I'm a single father. Victoria didn't even blink. She picked up her green tea. Then you should have thought about your daughter before you became a thief, Mr. Miller. Your lack of financial discipline is not my problem. Pack your things. If I see you on this floor in 10 minutes, security will escort you out. She walked away, the click of her high heels sounding like a firing squad. David stood in the lobby of Vane Holdings, a cardboard box cradled in his arms. It contained his Casio calculator, a framed drawing Lily had made of a purple cat, and his notes. His phone rang. It was Marcus, his boss at Apex. Marcus was a man who measured his life in commission checks and ulcer medication. David, what the hell did you do? Marcus screamed into the receiver. Victoria Vane just called my cell directly. She said you were embezzling from the corporate account. I used $9 of petty cash for a croissant because the registers were locked, Marcus, David said, his voice surprisingly calm. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a cold, heavy weight in his stomach. I offered to pay it back. She threw a tantrum. I don't care if she threw a piano at you, David. That's a $9 million account. Do you know what that contract means to this firm? It's 40% of our annual revenue. I know exactly what it means. I'm the one who wrote it, David said quietly. Well, you're not writing anything else for us, Marcus barked, though there was a hint of regret in his voice. Marcus knew David was the best asset they had, but in the corporate world, survival meant feeding the sharks. I'm sorry, Dave, I really am, but she gave me an ultimatum. You're terminated, effective immediately. HR will send your severance packages. Don't come back to the office. The line went dead. David stood on the rainy sidewalk of Michigan Avenue. He looked down at the drawing of the purple cat. He had no job. He had no health insurance for Lily. He had exactly $20 in his pocket. He took a deep breath, walked to his rusted sedan, and drove straight to Lily's school. He walked into the front office, handed the principal the $20 bill, and asked for $11 change. He handed the $9 to the secretary for Lily's field trip. She's going to have a great time, David, the secretary smiled. Good, David whispered. And that's all that matters. He sat in his car in the school parking lot for an hour, staring at the steering wheel. The panic should have set in by now. The terror of a single parent losing their livelihood should have paralyzed him. But instead, a strange crystalline clarity settled over him. Victoria Vane thought he was a nobody. She thought he was a tiny gear in a massive machine that she owned. She didn't know who he actually was. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a second, completely private cell phone. An old BlackBerry he kept turned off in his glove compartment. He powered it on. It took a full minute to boot up. When it did, the screen illuminated with a single unread notification from an encrypted email app. David dialed a number from memory. The call rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. Hello? Arthur, David said. It's David. There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. David, my God, it's been 3 years. We thought you vanished off the face of the earth after Sarah. The voice trailed off, softening with genuine sorrow. How are you, my boy? How is Lily? Lily is beautiful, Arthur. She looks just like her mother, David said, his throat tightening. But I'm calling because I'm ready. Arthur Pendleton was the chairman and majority shareholder of Pendleton Global, a multinational conglomerate worth roughly $40 billion. He was also Sarah's maternal uncle. When Sarah died, David had been utterly destroyed. Arthur had offered him a seat on the board, a vice presidency, millions of dollars in trust, but David had refused. He couldn't bear the high society galas, the fake smiles, the reminders of the life he and Sarah were supposed to build together. He wanted a quiet, simple life where he could focus entirely on raising his daughter away from the toxic glare of extreme wealth. He had taken a mid-level job at Apex under his legal middle name, living a modest life, earning his own bread, until today. Ready for what, David? Arthur asked, his tone turning serious. Apex Supply Solutions is about to sign a $9 million logistics contract with Vane Holdings at 2 p.m. today, David said, his voice cold and precise. I want you to buy Apex, Arthur paused. Apex, the mid-tier logistics firm? We could buy them out of our pocket change? Why? Because Victoria Vane just fired me over a $9 breakfast item, called me a thief, and forced my boss to terminate my employment to satisfy her ego. There was a long, terrifying silence on the phone. Arthur Pendleton loved his late niece fiercely, and he regarded David as a son. The Pendleton family was old money, dignified, quiet, and fiercely loyal. They despised bullies. A $9 breakfast, Arthur repeated, his voice dropping into a register that had caused CEOs of Fortune 500 companies to sweat. And she insulted Sarah's husband? She did. Consider it done, Arthur said. I'll have our acquisition team execute a hostile leverage buyout of Apex's parent company immediately. We already own a 12% shadow stake in their holding group. It will take my lawyers exactly 90 minutes to seize controlling interest. What do you want to do then? David looked at his Casio watch. It was 9:45 a.m. I want to attend the contract renewal meeting at 2 o'clock, David said. As the new owner, at 1:45 p.m., the executive boardroom of Vane Holdings was prepared for a celebration. A lavish spread of catering, far more expensive than a $9 croissant, was laid out on a mahogany credenza. Victoria Vane sat at the head of the long glass table, sipping a sparkling water. To her right sat her legal team, and to her left, Marcus Vance, the CEO of Apex Supply Solutions. Marcus looked pale. He kept wiping his brow with a handkerchief. He had spent the morning celebrating the firing of David Miller as a necessary sacrifice to save the company, but a strange rumor had been circulating the financial wires for the last hour. There was massive, anomalous trading volume surrounding Apex's parent company, Omnicorp Logistics. Marcus, Victoria said, her voice smooth and dominant, you look nervous. You shouldn't be. You made the right choice this morning. Eliminating weak links is the only way to maintain a healthy ecosystem. That auditor was cancer. Yes, Ms. Vane. Absolutely, Marcus stammered, checking his phone under the table. We pride ourselves on integrity. Good, let's get this signing over with. I have a flight to Aspen at 4, Victoria said, gesturing to her lawyer, who slid a thick, leather-bound document across the table toward Marcus. This was the $9 million contract. It represented 5 years of guaranteed revenue for Apex and absolute logistical dominance for Vane Holdings. Marcus picked up the heavy Montblanc pen. His hand shook slightly. He pressed the nib to the signature line. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom burst open. Victoria's brow furrowed in immediate annoyance. What is the meaning of this? I explicitly stated no interruptions. She froze. Walking into the room was David Miller, but this wasn't the defeated man from the cafeteria. He was still wearing the same modest charcoal suit, but his posture had completely changed. He walked with a calm, terrifying authority. Behind him walked 2 men in immaculate, bespoke Italian suits, carrying heavy leather briefcases. Senior corporate litigators whose hourly rates could fund a small town. Marcus dropped his pen. David, what are you doing here? I fired you. Security. Security won't be coming, Marcus, David said smoothly, walking to the opposite end of the table. He didn't sit down. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the glass. Victoria scoffed, a look of pure disgust crossing her face. You have some nerve showing your face back here, you little rat. Did you come to beg for your $9 back? Get out before I have the police arrest you for trespassing. David smiled. It was a cold, humorless expression that sent a sudden, inexplicable shiver down Victoria's spine. I'm not trespassing, Ms. Vane, David said. In fact, as of exactly 22 minutes ago, I technically own the chair you're sitting on. Victoria laughed out loud, a harsh, mocking sound. Are you delusional? Someone call psychiatric evaluation. One of the lawyers behind David stepped forward. He unzipped his briefcase and pulled out a certified corporate decree, sliding it across the table directly to Victoria's lead counsel. Ms. Vane, the lawyer said clearly, at 1:22 p.m. EST, Pendleton Global completed a total equity buyout of Omnicorp Logistics, the parent company of Apex Supply Solutions. Pendleton Global now holds a 64% controlling interest. Mr. David Miller has been appointed Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Logistics Division, effective immediately. Victoria's lawyer picked up the document. As his eyes scanned the signatures, the state seals, and the unmistakable gold emblem of Pendleton Global, the color drained completely from his face. Miss Vane, the lawyer whispered, his voice trembling. It's legitimate. Pendleton Global bought them out. Total acquisition. Victoria's laugh died in her throat. She snatched the paper from her lawyer's hands. Her eyes raced across the text. Pendleton Global. David Miller, CEO, authorized signatory, Pendleton Global. Victoria whispered, her mind racing. Why would a $40 billion empire buy a mid-tier logistics firm in 90 minutes? That's insane. That's market manipulation. It's not manipulation, Victoria, David said, using her first name for the first time, his voice cutting through her panic like a scalpel. It's family business. My late wife was Sarah Pendleton. I chose to live a quiet life. I chose to work hard, from the bottom up, to teach my daughter the value of an honest dollar. A concept you clearly know nothing about. Victoria stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The arrogant, untouchable billionaire was suddenly looking at a man who wielded power that made her own fortune look like pocket change. "You," Victoria stammered, her face turning a deep, humiliated crimson. "You set me up." "No," David said calmly. "You set yourself up. You blew up your own world because you couldn't resist the urge to step on someone you thought was smaller than you. You thought a single dad working a middle-class job was a safe target for your cruelty?" Marcus, realizing the tectonic shift that had just occurred, fell out of his chair trying to stand up. Mr. Miller? Sir, I was forced. She threatened the company. I had to protect the employees." David didn't even look at him. "We'll discuss your severance package tomorrow, Marcus. It won't include a bonus." David turned his gaze back to Victoria. He reached across the table, picked up the $9 million contract that Marcus had been about to sign, and looked at it. "This is a very lucrative contract," David mused. $9 million. It would have streamlined your entire Midwestern distribution network. Without it, your shipping costs will skyrocket by roughly 30% next quarter as you try to source secondary providers. "David," Victoria said, her voice suddenly losing its sharp edge, desperate to salvage her business. She forced a tight, artificial smile. "Let's be reasonable here. It was a misunderstanding in the cafe. The pressure of the renewal? I was stressed. I enforce policy strictly, but obviously if I had known your background. If you had known I was rich, you would have treated me like a human being," David corrected her, his voice flat. "But because you thought I was poor, you treated me like dirt. That is who you are, Victoria." David looked her dead in the eye, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he ripped the $9 million contract completely in half. The sound of the thick paper tearing echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He threw the pieces onto the table. "The contract is canceled," David said. "Effective immediately. Apex Solutions will cease all distribution services to Vane Holdings by midnight tonight. Good luck finding a new carrier by tomorrow morning." Victoria stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "You can't do this. This will cost my company millions in delayed shipments. It will tank our Q3 stock price." Then I suggest you look in your petty cash envelope," David said, turning his back on her. "Maybe you can find $9 in there to fix it." The rain had stopped by the time David walked out of the building. The afternoon sun was breaking through the Chicago clouds, reflecting off the puddles on the pavement. He walked to his old sedan, got in, and drove to Lily's school. He was early. He sat by the playground fence, watching the kids run around. A few minutes later, the school bell rang, and a flood of children poured out. Lily ran toward him, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, a giant smile on her face. "Daddy! Daddy!" she cried, throwing her arms around his neck. The science museum was so cool. We saw a giant T-Rex and a rocket ship. "Thank you for the $9. David held his daughter tight, burying his face in her hair, feeling the heavy burden of the last 3 years finally lift. He didn't care about the billions, the corporate buyouts, or the look of terror on Victoria Vane's face. He cared about this. "You're welcome, sweetie," David whispered, smiling as he pulled back. "Hey, how would you like to go get some ice cream? Any flavor you want? Can I get double chocolate with sprinkles?" Lily asked, her eyes lighting up. "You can get the whole shop, kiddo." David smiled, taking her hand. As they walked to the car, David's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a news alert. Vane Holdings stock plummets, 8% following sudden terminations of logistics group. David turned the phone off, slipped it into his pocket, and didn't look back.